Good afternoon, everyone. We will now call the December 2nd, 2024 board meeting to order. Ms. Hairston, will you please call the roll?
Yes, I surely will, Madam Vice Chair. Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2, Ms. Aretta Bowden.
Present.
Representing Educational District 3, Dr. Ken Zeff.
Present.
Representing Educational District 4 and Board Vice Chair, Ms. Jennifer McDonald.
Present.
Representing Educational District 5 and Board Chair, Ms. Erica Mitchell, and she's en route. Representing Educational District 6, Ms. Isha Collins. Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 7, Mr. Alfred Shivy Brooks. Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 8, Ms. Cynthia Briscoe Brown.
Present.
Representing Educational District at Large, Seat 9, Ms. Jessica Johnson.
Present.
Also present, we have our Superintendent, Dr. Brian Johnson, as well as General Counsel, Ms. Nina Gupta. Madam Vice Chair, we have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much. I will now entertain a motion to approve the November 4, 2024 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Katie Howard. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the December 2nd, 2024 board meeting agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Cynthia Briscoe Brown. Is there a second?
Second.
Was that Aretta?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Seconded by Aretta Baldwin. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Johnson, will you please introduce the work session items?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. We have a full work session today with 5 presentations. Our first presentation is a board-requested presentation on the gifted program update that will be presented by Ms. Haygood as well as Ms. Kawana Stewart. And our second presentation will be an update on our 2025 legislative priorities presented by Ms. Erica Long. Our third presentation is a presentation on or an update on enrollment and school facility utilization report, which is a follow-up to an earlier presentation that will be shared by Mr. Dan Drake. Our fourth presentation is the monthly financial update, as well as a technology update. And that finance update will be Dr. Lisa Bracken and Solifemi Aina will present on the technology portion. And then the last one will be a student outcomes focused government, in which we will focus on interim goal guardrail 3.1, which is the percentage of staff, students, and parents who indicate that the district has a welcoming environment for fear, intimidation, and retaliation. With this time, Ms. Haygood and Ms. Stewart, we are now ready for your presentation. I don't know if that hand was for me introducing them or for them coming up. I will take it for me, my introduction. I'm sure it was for you all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Johnson and board members. Again, I am Mona Haygood. I am in my 3rd year as gifted coordinator and my 13th year with Atlanta Public Schools. My purpose today is to provide an overview of the Gifted and Talented program and a status update on program demographics and intentions. I will include information on our assessment protocols, initiatives, and the impacts to student outcomes. I hope you will take away an increased understanding of the program, its services, and the impact to the district's mission to prepare students for college, career, and life. Program overview. Gifted and Talented Education in Atlanta Public Schools provides a differentiated instruction for intellectually advanced and creatively gifted students. With exposure to the program, we will architect globally competitive, critical, and creative thinkers of the 21st century so the unique needs of gifted and talented students will be recognized, valued, and nurtured so their inspired minds are equipped to change the world. There is no universally accepted definition of gifted. However, in the state of Georgia, a gifted education student is defined as one who demonstrates a high degree of intellectual and/or creative ability, exhibits an exceptionally high degree of motivation and/or excels in specific academic fields, and who needs special instruction and/or special ancillary services to achieve at levels commensurate with his or her ability. At a glance is the numerical overview of the program. There are 5,040 gifted students in APS traditional schools, 651 identified students attending charter schools, 982 staff possess the gifted endorsement, which includes central office staff. Each school has a gifted teacher who serves as the lead. This person is responsible for managing the gifted program functions at the school level. Every school in APS has at least a half-time gifted teacher, despite the number of identified students. There are 5 district-level instructional coaches and me, the gifted coordinator. I am proud to report that there are gifted identified students on every traditional and charter and partner campus in Atlanta Public Schools. My team and I have worked diligently to focus in on high-yielding impacts for program quality and growth. Eligibility criteria. In alignment with the state definition for gifted, the state also provides the established thresholds for gifted identification. The identification process is nuanced and multifaceted. The Gifted Office provides FAQs and an informational video on our website, which spells out the process in supreme detail and is linked in the appendix of this presentation. Once a student is identified as gifted, their identification is valid across the state of Georgia and continues with positive academic performance. With MAP as a universal screener, one enters the gifted assessment process through a database automatic referral. At or above the 85th percentile has been established as the threshold, which both provides equitable access to students who demonstrate potential, but also supports the prudent use of financial resources. Student data is considered from the previous spring administration through to the winter administration on the reading and math assessments. Using the universal screener and the automatic referral process has made for more equitable access to the gifted assessment process, as it does not require an action from a parent or a teacher. The student has 8 data points that might refer them for assessment. After all of the assessment data has been collected and reviewed by the school's gifted eligibility team, a determination of eligibility can be made. Because a student receives all of the available assessments in a single assessment window, students found eligible for gifted services will be screened again after 3 semesters. However, their MAP data, product or performance results, and cumulative grade point averages are under perpetual review. At any point, a student has an accumulation of data that makes them eligible, they will be scheduled for gifted services. Some data suggests students might benefit from an assessment administered by a school psychologist. Those students are referred by the district to the Psychological Services Center for assessment by an APS school psychologist. There is currently no limit to the number of times a student can receive a full new battery of assessment. Last year, approximately 4,000 students were assessed for gifted identification. Over the last several years, the Office of Gifted and Talented Education has invested in the building of a gifted eligibility portal. The portal assists in the management of the identification process and the technical challenges of managing the volume of data and number of students. By using a student's unique student number, an assessment profile is generated. Using the logic of identification, in the last 6 months, we have identified 200+ students who might have otherwise gone overlooked. Their identification has been independent of an action by a parent, a teacher, or a counselor. Their identification was independent of their race, ethnicity, gender, behavior, or socioeconomic status. Additionally, because the portal tracks on student number, when a student moves from one school to another within the district, their data follows them. Even when they leave APS and come back, their data is there awaiting them. The portal is just another one of the ways we have increased access to gifted identification. As of a few hours ago, the portal presented an updated eligibility view. Of 4,135 students referred this fall, 972 have been found eligible. That's 23.5%. The portal is working. I don't know about you, but this is good news for me and my team. It is long believed that gifted programs seek to exclude and perpetuate separatism in school communities. It is my greatest desire to dispel that myth here in APS. This program seeks to meet the specific academic needs of gifted identified students and to make sure all students, regardless of identification, have the most engaging school experience possible. It is our intention to make sure all stakeholders who desire information about the program can get that information easily. Stakeholders are kept informed of the details of the Gifted and Talented program in several ways. The GATE website has pages providing information on the identification process, the way in which the gifted are served, enriched, and how they can be supported. Each of the components of the program is summarized in an FAQ, which also appears in translation. Schools are asked to link their site to ours, as well as to share news about the Gifted program in their weekly communications to parents. In addition to these, the Gifted team hosts a booth at the Back to School Bash, partners with the Office of Family Engagement at their various events, are visible by supporting other district departments, and we host our own events throughout the year. As an even greater, specific, and direct attempt to inform parents and the community about gifted identification and assessment, this fall, every school was tasked with hosting an information session about gifted testing, the timeline, assessments, and eligibility. Though this type of meeting has been strongly encouraged in the past, it was a requirement of the office this year with a deadline, provided materials, and support. The meetings were advertised in school newsletters, on websites, through Class Dojo, and even by special invitation. To date, 60 schools reported the results of their meetings. There were 33 meetings held in person, 27 Zoom meetings, approximately 1,071 attendees. Most meetings were facilitated by gifted leads. However, principals at Benteen and Mary Lynn facilitated the meetings themselves. Additionally, the parent informational video posted on the GATE website has been viewed 1,505 times since July 25th. Programs and services. The Gifted and Talented Education Program strategy extends through 4 areas. School support includes program functions that include participation in classroom observations, supporting the implementation of the testing and identification process, and by providing site-based professional development. Talent development is supported whether implemented throughout the whole school, in specific classrooms, or through targeted small groups. Developing talent is tailored to the needs and goals of each individual school. Professional learning is provided to gifted professionals, school leaders, general education teachers, counselors, and instructional coaches. Stakeholder engagement is GATE's way of connecting with students, teachers, parents, staff, and the larger community. Gifted Education Month this coming March will honor the legacy of Dr. Mary Frazier, an African-American researcher from the University of Georgia, who in the 1990s pioneered work towards increasing the representation of culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse students participating in gifted programs. Much of our foundation in talent development stems from her work. Talent development refers to practices that develop the talents of high-ability students who have not yet been identified as gifted. Talent development is designed to deliver a rigorous and relevant curriculum to high-ability students to accommodate their range of academic and intellectual needs. The gifted teacher may push into the classroom to provide critical and creative thinking workshops. Students may be pulled into the gifted resource room, or the gifted teacher may collaborate with the general education teacher to provide differentiated resources. Further, with intentional programming specifically designed to increase equity and access, a talent development cohort, including schools with the greatest opportunity for increased identification of underrepresented populations, has broadened over the last several years with a more specific agenda. Those participating in the cohort receive additional teacher and student materials that might increase student exposure to critical thinking. These teachers have had an opportunity to be trained in creativity development, and several of them have become Critical Friends Group Coach trained. Having this training has improved their ability to collaborate with peers with a desired outcome of sharing gifted instructional practices within the general education classroom. A further push with this cohort of schools has been the goal of increasing the number of students participating in the academic fairs. An individual project winning first place at the district level can be used in support of a gifted identification. Encouraging talent development teachers to utilize this opportunity led to the submission of 84 additional projects across the fairs last school year. Listed here are just some of the gifted program services and enrichment opportunities. All programs and services offered by the Gate Office allow for the inclusion of students who are not identified as gifted, but who might benefit from participation. We are intentional about seeking out these students by working with school-based staff to do the same. An opportunity listed here is the Gifted Internship Mentorship Program. The program places junior and senior students in a mentorship course the first semester and then connects them with a real-world career placement of their interest second semester. Last year, students were placed in labs at Georgia Tech, North American Properties at Colony Square, and in various APS departments. Currently, only 2 of our high schools schedule for the course. It would be our pleasure to secure support from senior leadership that might ensure all high school students have access to this program. The gifted endorsement is a credentialed field suggesting that those who have completed it possess the skills, knowledge, and dispositions required to differentiate for the needs of gifted and high-ability learners. Upon a review from the Georgia Professional Standards Commission in 2014, the APS program received a commendation for the field experience component. Since that time, the district has endorsed nearly 350 staff persons. The breakdown of endorsed staff by cluster can be found in the appendix of this presentation. Xanadu is the summer enrichment program offered by the Gate Office. It has been serving students from across the metro Atlanta area for more than 20 years. It is possibly the greatest synthesis of the embodiment of what gifted education can be for students, teachers, and parents. Xanadu is where gifted endorsement candidates complete their field experience by offering an original thematic unit which is written for high student engagement. Though offered by the Gifted Office, a gifted identification is not a requirement for participation. High ability and talent development students are encouraged to apply. Additionally, students from schools participating in the talent development cohort are offered scholarships to attend. Our goal here is to further include and expose students from underrepresented populations with the opportunity perceived as only available to certain students. Xanadu can accommodate about 400 students. Selection is based on class size ratio, the distribution of students across the grade levels, interest in sessions and courses, recommendations, and the number of available scholarships. Last year, nearly 600 applications were received. Though we wish it were, it simply is not possible to accommodate every applicant. Program outcomes. According to the National Association for Gifted Children, between 6 to 10% of public school students are identified as gifted. As of today, APS exceeds this average. The next several slides present program demographics. Reflected here is the ethnicity comparison between the state of Georgia and APS. Presented here are the percentages of gifted identified students in each cluster. Individual school, charter, and partner percentages can be found in the appendix. The next several slides reflect data around gifted student academic performance. Since 2022, in ELA, there has been a 10 percentage point gain in distinguished level performance on the end of grade assessment. In the same time span, in math, there has been a 13 percentage point gain in distinguished level performance. In school years 22 and 24, gifted students experienced a higher rate of growth on the end of grade assessment. In reference to end of course assessment, gifted students taking the American Literature course experienced an 18 percentage point gain in distinguished performance since 2022. Since the introduction of the Algebra Concepts and Connections assessment, 60.2% of gifted students have scored at the distinguished level. In the last 2 years, gifted students taking the SAT have scored at the 84th and 86th national percentile ranking, respectively. Presented here is a 3-year picture of the number of students referred for gifted assessments beside the number of students found eligible for gifted services. Though a dip in 22-23, the rate of identification remained fairly consistent. There was a steep increase in the number of referrals based on a change in our assessment protocols. We wanted to make sure our change in process did not exclude any student from the opportunity of an identification. A breakdown by cluster is presented in the appendix. You asked what we're doing to increase equity and access. In addition to all the things I've shared in this presentation, the use of MAP as a universal screener, supporting the implementation of multiple delivery models that are all inclusive, the use of products and performances which are locally normed in support of a gifted identification, the presentation of professional learning to all levels of stakeholders, and the execution of student-centered programs that change lives. I believe a huge component of supporting and growing a program is having the right people doing the right work. My team consists of a group of people who are committed to moving the work that is gifted and talented education forward. With a combined 115 years of service in gifted education, we have 2 APS graduates, Ms. Jasmine Gaither from Douglas High School in 1994 and CREAM class of 1998, Ms. Corey Farmer. Of the 5 instructional coaches, 4 of them have only ever worked in APS with more than 20 years of service each. Mr. Andrew Nichols worked at Grady Midtown High School for 17 years prior to joining the team 3 years ago. Dr. Cadence Spearman, a trained chiropractor, chose education as a career and has educated to some degree each of her 4 sons in APS. Ms. Jarita Humphrey, following in her mother's footsteps, graduated from Morris Brown and came straight to work here in APS. Mr. Buck Green has been a legendary principal and has actively shined a light in dark places to improve representation. And I currently serve on the Georgia Association for Gifted Children's Executive Board as the legislative liaison. Not only have we attended state and national conventions, but several of us have also presented at both. We are connected across the metro area to the people doing the work, and we are a committed team to the work of serving all children. Not only do we care about representation, we are representation. With this program update, I hope that you will take away an increased understanding of the APS Gifted and Talented program and services provided. Are there any questions?
Oh, I'm sure there are. Really quickly, I don't think what we're looking at is what you presented, so I don't know if on Simile it doesn't appear to match, and then what I'm looking at printed-wise doesn't match. All the slides are not present. So can we make sure that we get the most recent version updated? Great. Is that a, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we definitely want it online too, because people follow along, because yeah, we were kind of like, hey, we don't have all the same great info that you were sharing.
I'm sorry to hear that.
All good, we'll get it. All good. So questions? Katie? Who else? Ken? You? Okay. All right, down here. Any questions? Everyone? Okay, got it. Katie, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the presentation, and I too would like to dive deeper into the slides with the outcome data. Excuse my voice. I asked about that as well, as I'm sure many of my colleagues. So, really wanting to see the impact of the gifted program from kids, entering it and how they progress and how that ties back to our goals. Also, like seeing that, we're using MAP as a way to determine potential eligibility. I know you referenced, was it 200 more students that have been identified in the last 6 months? Can you share with us how many more students since the use of MAP to help determine eligibility have we seen be potentially eligible for gifted services since using MAP?
So we haven't quite compiled the data in that way, because even before the district started administering MAP, the gifted program administered MAP as the achievement piece of data. And so we would have to go back, do we only consider data since the district started using it, or should we include it? Because for years before, we used MAP as the achievement piece.
So for how long were we using MAP during that time period? I'm not as familiar with and not to put you on the spot on that question necessarily. Just
Yeah.
trying to pinpoint, obviously we're trying to make sure more students are looked at to be served by gifted.
Mm-hmm.
And we know we have opportunity in this area and wanting to see if this has been a tool that's been helpful.
Well, without the statistical number without the number of students specifically, it was tremendously helpful when the district adopted MAP, as it wasn't a secondary assessment that we had to purchase. And we know that because every student has 2 data points 3 times a year, we have seen an increase, and I'll be happy to scratch the data to find the specific increase.
And that's helpful. And obviously, parents, guardians don't have to sign consent because their children are already going through the MAP assessment.
Correct.
Last question is talented development. Is that available in all of our schools right now, our elementary schools?
So some form of talent development is available in all schools, elementary, middle, and high. When we look at students participating in the STEAM clusters, resource at the elementary level is still available. So that may look different than students in the IB clusters, because in those clusters, we have a greater number of classroom teachers who have the gifted endorsement. And so that differentiation is happening in real time in the regular classroom. So we can't, do you call it talent development because they are getting that instruction from the homeroom teacher? And so the ability to quantify that is difficult to just isolate. Students at middle school and high school get accelerated courses, and we have a mixed model in all middle and high school programs. And so, we like to think that talent development, and we believe that it is happening because there are non-identified students sitting beside gifted identified students in their regular courses.
And thank you for giving that overview. And I understand with IB, of course, the pushing in of the service, and it would be great as we move forward to see the data around that, and if impactful, how we potentially increase that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks, Katie. Aretta? None? Okay, Ken?
Thanks for this, and I'm glad we're doing a deep dive here, and I'll let others get into the equity piece of this, because I think we all share this concern when you look at slide 16, just how big of a gap there is amongst our schools. From if we know that gifted kids are evenly distributed across our district, right? It's not bright. Bright kids, bright kids who have extra resources is over here, but gifted is something different, as you know. And so it seems like we still have some work to do on making sure that we're holding kids to the same standards. Sounds like you're addressing some of that. A lot of work to be done. My question is around program impact. The slides that you put up, and they went by quick, and as Vice Chair McDonald said, I couldn't look at them in front of me, but it looked like maybe you can run those back. It looks like thank you for that. No, you're right. So how do we evaluate how the intervention is working for kids? Surprisingly, off. Oh, all right. Yeah. So people want to. No.
We have no sound on, kid.
Come on. Look. This isn't. If you think this is the first time, I'll pinch off when we're ready. All right. Is that better? There we go. So, looking at this is a slide. I can't see what number it is, but not surprisingly, our kids who participate in the gifted program score well. These are some bright kids. They're scoring well. Oh, no, can't have that one? Okay, fine. Thought we were sharing now. How do we attribute this to the gifted? Stick with this. How do we attribute this to the gifted interventions that we've talked about? So I'd expect our gifted kids to outperform our district because that's the way they're wired. But is there a way to control versus kids who didn't participate in the interventions? How do we know if we had a good year, if we had a great year? How can we look at these interventions and say, hey, because of this, our kids scored better on EOGs?
It is difficult to isolate that information, especially given part of the previous answer in terms of how students receive services. So we consider our inputs, and we know that they are broad, right? But it is very difficult to isolate impact just based on the things that we have done. And so we are happy to accept any support in what metrics could be used to separate students' experience in the program differently from those not.
So I don't want to overstep my role of sitting on the dais and telling you how to measure something, but I will look at Dr. Johnson and say there are folks that have given this a lot of thought, and as far as measuring the outcomes of a program, just because we can't necessarily tease out it in EOGs. EOGs may not be the right measure, but I'd love to make sure that kids are getting high quality experiences, and I'd look to a measure. While I know it is hard, it is not impossible. And so if there's some sort of measures that you could offer, or that I know we're connected to other districts who spend some time thinking about this, I'd love to challenge our staff to come up with a way to measure progress.
Thank you. Shivi? Yes? Oh, do you want Dr. Johnson's response now? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
just
you are.
real-
Yeah,
Ken's
I
demanding
was waiting.
immediate response.
Yeah.
Just real quick, I think it's going to be important as the strategic plan is developed, because we're talking about multi-measures here that we're. I want us to be clear about what we're zeroing in on and focusing in on as far as accountability. And so I think that's conversation A, and we can have that conversation more broadly. I think conversation B is that speaks to the importance of the strategic plan. The areas that we're going to invest in and do, we should be measuring. And in reality, I don't necessarily think that's been the broad brush practice across the organization, at least reporting on those measures. And so I think to the point, there's a lot of opportunity as we look at key performance indicators, and this being an area of what measure do we want to identify as we lean into as we go through the strategic planning process. We can definitely get there with this particular thing.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Dr. Johnson. Shivi?
Yeah. No, that was great. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for talking about Xanadu. I remember taking my son Bryce to participate in Xanadu over the summer, and he had a really good experience. I did want to get my hands on a few of the slides that we were kind of going through quickly towards the end. I think there was another one maybe before this one that showed demographics. After this, yes, this. So much to take in and process. I have some questions about MAP being used as a universal screener. What year did we begin using MAP as a universal screener for gifted?
So as a district, I would have to approximate that it's been within the last 5 to 6 school years. Maybe just before it's hard to believe the pandemic's been 5 years ago, but just before going into the pandemic.
Got you. Is there some knowledge that we have around gaps in performance on standardized testing for different demographics of students?
We have not personally done that research as an office. The state provides for us a list of approved assessments, and so we select assessments from that list, believing that the assessment board from the gifted office at the state level has evaluated the available assessment.
Are there other means to identify a child for giftedness other than the MAP screener?
Yes, so if you go back to the beginning, data is collected in 4 areas towards a gifted identification. A student needs nationally normed data in only one of those 4 areas in order to be identified. And so when I spoke about the use of the academic fairs, that's one of the ways that we're encouraging schools to use locally normed opportunities to support a gifted identification.
So are there other referral methods per adults in the school, adults who interact with the child on a day-to-day basis? Are there other referral methods other than these fairs, other than the MAP assessments?
For sure. There has been a time in our recent history when we had 3 routes of referral: a parent referral, a teacher referral, and an automatic referral. But because of the volume of data that we have from MAP, and at the threshold that we've established at the 85th percentile, we use it currently as the sole source of referral.
That's what I'm trying to
But
get
I
to.
would like to say publicly,
Yes.
having MAP as the screener has removed other inequities, because no matter what attempts we made in some pockets of the community, even to include sending the parent referral form home, it's been difficult to get that back. Also, in some pockets, the parent referral was being overutilized. So there could be times in some elementary schools where we received 120 kindergarten parent referrals. And so using the data has standardized the referral process and made it more equitable numerically.
Have we also standardized our perspective on what we deem as gifted?
So currently, because we're situated in the state of Georgia and that definition is outlined and those thresholds are established by the state, that's what we adhere to here in Atlanta.
And those things would include creativity, leadership, other things aside from academic, correct?
Yes and no. So not as an identification. So if you go back to page 9, it outlines the specifics of the state definition. So currently, a student has to meet this criteria to be identified, here in the state of Georgia, and because of our location here in APS. However, we do look at those multiple dimensions of student capability through our program services. So our program standards cover creativity, leadership, critical and creative problem solving, interest, so on and so forth.
So is a child able to evidence giftedness in creativity or motivation or achievement via a standardized screener.
So the assessments that we use are all nationally normed.
So I guess what I'm trying to get to is this. So I received during your presentation a text from a parent in the North Atlanta cluster. And this is what they said to me. They said, I would like to know how GATE is identifying gifted students with disabilities. The answer is they aren't doing it well. It's an inherently discriminatory evaluation process. Kids with handwriting disabilities, like one of mine, with severe dysgraphia, who will never be able to draw their silly picture in the creative section without it looking like a 2-year-old draw it. He has no chance because a blind grader. Can we get some water for board member Johnson? It is. I'm sorry. Kids with handwriting disabilities, like one of mine with severe dysgraphia, will never be able to draw their silly picture in the creative section without it looking like a 2-year-old drew it. He has no chance because a blind grader has no idea that this child has a disability. Yet he continues to meet the criteria for evaluation, but never gets in. Mainstream students with disabilities is a huge miss. So with our students with disabilities, they're at a disadvantage with us utilizing the universal screener the way that we are. But then also, our students who exhibit giftedness in other ways aside from academia also are losing the opportunity for reference. So I bring this up to say, and I'm going to, I guess, direct it back to Dr. Johnson in the spirit of my good brother Ken Zeff. I do think we should be maybe having some considerations about other ways to be able to refer students aside from just the universal screener, because it does serve at a disadvantage for particular demographics of students who happen to be the majority demographic of students in our district. It also puts at a disadvantage our students with disabilities. And I do receive like the over referral by folks who believe their child, that we all believe our children are great, all right? And I'm the parent of a child who is in the gifted program, so I get it. But I just had questions as to whether or not we should be considering opening up other methods for identification as well.
So give me just one second. I know you
Yes.
I know you're itching to respond, but I want to make sure we also get a chance to progress through all the questions, I'm sure. Here's what I want to say about gifted. I think there's going to be opportunity to continue to improve. Let me just give you the 30,000 foot view. There's going to be opportunity to continue to improve. I think a lot of work has been done. I know this is an area of focus that's been elevated. I do want to be clear with the board that if we focus on everything, we focus on. So I want to be really clear about all the levers that we pull and where we double down. I do believe this is an area that if we're going to do, we should be doing it well, which is why I do believe we should be focusing and measuring, right? And so when we talk about going back to even Board Member Zeff's question about overarching achievement, we probably should be looking at growth, right? When we start talking about the rate of change of these. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity. Yeah. We should be looking at students with exceptionalities and how are we servicing that body of students that have the challenges you spoke to really well. So I think as we go through, the spirit of these reports is to take the feedback that the board gives, right, and use that to continue to improve, because there's obviously going to be areas that historically have been a part of the district where we're going to be able to lean in and move the work forward. So I do want to be clear that all this is really quality feedback, and what we try to do is take that information. We internalize it as a district and try to make sure that post-board meeting we have some type of action on areas of opportunity. So I do want to be clear that it gives us some kind of marching orders as we continue to go forward.
No, 1,000%.
Thank you.
And I am moving on, but when we're looking at these charts of how many students are identified at each particular school, and you're seeing so many schools with asterisks and no kids identified, I struggle with that. That there are no gifted babies in those schools.
That's not what the asterisk represents.
Okay.
The asterisk is there when there are fewer than 10 identified.
Fewer than 10. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
there are gifted students in every school.
But in some cases, there may not be.
There are gifted students on every
In
campus
every
as
school.
of today.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you
Also,
very
I
much.
did want to add that we have multiple pieces of data that are collected. Every student may not perform well on the referenced assessment that the parent is texting you about, but we have a teacher evaluation scale in addition to our partnership with psychological services. And so when they assess students with special needs and they find that they meet the identified threshold, they refer them back to us. So we would not like to believe that students are being overlooked.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica?
Sure, I'll be quick because I think so it's still on this same slide. I have a question around the creativity and motivation pieces of it. And so for what I'm hearing from parents is that that portion is more subjective. Is that state mandated? And is there a weight? Is it weighted
So
for that
again, in
part?
reference to some similar assessments, so we have what we call the gifted rating scales. So for every student who is assessed for gifted, when we assess for all 4 of these areas, we accept a rating scale in the area of creativity and motivation. So those are teacher-completed scales where affirmative data from those scales can only be used in one of the areas. Outside of that, a product or performance can be accepted. So when I alluded to the academic fairs, for example, in the last several years, an ESOL student wrote an essay. The essay was recognized by a national ESOL organization, and the student went out to wherever the conference was to read the essay. That supports a gifted identification. And so it is not just formal assessments that we use in these areas. And where there are, those assessments are nationally normed. So the Torrance gets a terrible rap in terms of what creativity means, but we've had several of many of us have gone through the training. And what it asks is, if you are responding to a circle as the stimuli, and you draw a face, a ball, a clock, any of the norm responses, those things are considered typical. So the assessment scores on atypical responses to a stimuli. So they are not quite as subjective as the general public believes.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is just around, there was a slide in there, I can't find it, that had the number of gifted certified individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
So on slide 16, we have like by cluster, the percentage of students. Is there do we know kind of
It's
by
in the
cluster?
appendix. Yes,
For the
ma'am.
teachers as well? For
Yes,
the teachers as well?
it's in the appendix.
Okay, so we know like where they are.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Great, Cynthia?
I just have one question, and if it's already been asked and answered, please tell me. I apologize. I had to step out to take a call. What is our current policy on outside assessment for gifted identification? Are there outside doctors or specialists or professionals who have the ability to basically give a student a gifted certification, which we then will use?
So about 11 years ago, the district stopped accepting outside psychologicals. And so what we have replaced that opportunity with is a partnership with psychological services. And based on a student's first set of assessments, depending on how the data falls, we refer a student to district psychological assessment. So yet again, another way that we extend the opportunity for an identification.
But we identify those professionals and we work with them, as opposed to allowing the parent to go out and pick somebody who's going to give their child a gifted
Correct.
identification. All right. Very good. Thank you very much.
Great, Cynthia, thank you. Aretta?
Thank you. I believe I found my answer. It was in the appendix on slide 35. I was curious about the total number and percentage that we're talking about, because we're spending a good amount of time on this, which is great. But I was just curious about the percentage of our students that we're talking about, and it looks like it's like less than 2%. Is that correct? So was it 837? The total children, I don't know if your slide still aligns with what I have. I mean,
There are
I don't
currently-
know. It says referred and eligible, so that's not total.
So if you look on slide 36,
Yeah, slide 16 was not showing me that.
The slides
So
have been
there are
updated.
currently 5,691
Okay, so a little less
students.
than 10% of, that we're talking about.
So right at 11%.
And is it safe to say, and I'm using soft G terms because I'm not, but while I do believe, no doubt, that there are gifted children everywhere, and there are different ways of defining gifted, and people are gifted in other areas. In the spirit of soft G, I guess I'm more concerned with the data that you put on the screen that we don't have in our deck that shows what does that mean in terms of outcomes, right? And if we have children who are not showing or exhibiting the outcomes that we need, then our focus should be on that. And I'm not trying to make suggestions, but it's just something that needs to be said, that we're trying to get our children to level. And I am all for gifted in the gifted program, but I just wanted to put in context that we're talking about less than 10% of our students.
Okay, last question. I know we're over some time, but it's okay. There's some confusion about who pays for the teachers to get this gifted endorsement. Is it the district or is it teachers themselves? Or can you just explain that a little bit for the community?
So the gifted office currently runs 2 cohorts that we use Title II funding to pay for it with. And so we open the application season every spring, and typically we can take about 60 participants. And so we pay for those. There are other places where the school may decide to sponsor a cohort themselves, and they use school-based funds in partnership with one of the regional educational agencies to have someone either come in or they attend an endorsement program that way. There are teachers who pay for it themselves. I have not met anyone in a really long time who paid for it themselves. And there are others who will go to, say, UGA to get an advanced degree in gifted education.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Johnson, that's it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, Ms. Long, we're ready for legislative updates.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, board members, superintendent. It is my honor to present to you our proposed legislative priorities for next year's 2025 session of the Georgia General Assembly. Of course, we're at the end of this calendar year, and with January comes a new session of what will be a new legislative body. We will have new legislators in the state Senate and the state House. So this is the first year of that 2-year biennium session. That means that any legislation that's proposed during this next 40-day period, if it doesn't go all the way across the finish line at the end of sine die, it can come back up the following year in 2026. The purpose of today's discussion is to set our legislative advocacy priorities for next year, to forecast upcoming significant legislative and policymaking activity, and to give you all, the board and our community, an understanding of our legislative strategy for this upcoming Georgia General Assembly session. We always start with our guiding principles as a local education agency. That's, of course, adequate state government support for schools and teachers through implementation of state policy and allocation of state resources. You will recall that the one constitutional duty of the Georgia General Assembly is to pass a balanced budget every year. That is the most important function of the legislature. And as with any governing agency, that budget is an expression of the state legislature's values, and particularly how it values and supports education through that budgetary process. One of our guiding principles is strong public school options and support for our charter system model, including the autonomy, local control, and flexibility granted to us as a charter system. State funding. State funding is so much of what the legislature does, and there are key state funding priorities that we will continue to advocate for when they're back in January. Number one, we're going to monitor any potential for federal disinvestment in pre-K through 12 schools and advocate for increased state funding to replace those resources. It's very early on. Of course, we have a new administration coming to the White House. But as we learn more about that administration's proposals around education policy and funding, we want to make sure to help guide the conversations on the state level about what that would mean for any increased state participation. In plain language, what we're hearing coming out of DC is the possibility of taking some of the federal components, such as Title I funding, funding for special education, as well as some teacher preparation programs, and potentially moving them to block grants to the state. This is very early days. Of course, we only have the inauguration of the next president in mid-January. But as we learn more about those proposals and those ideas, we will start to see how that new perspective on federal funding will trickle down to the state. One of our priorities at the state level will be supporting legislation addressing commercial property digests as a resource for school funding. This is an issue important to us here in the city of Atlanta, but it's also important to other suburban school districts and districts across the state that have a substantial commercial property digest, and they want to be able to tap into that appropriately as a means of potentially offering some relief to individual homeowners. And we will continue to ask that the state establishes funding for universal free lunch for pre-K through 12 students. We saw some relief in the last session of the legislature around free and reduced price lunches, but we're looking to make this more of a semi-permanent investment on the state level. And thank you, Board Member Brooks, for the suggestion on that particular important issue for families. Other funding priorities that we anticipate coming up, the continued funding of quality basic education. The state of Georgia has fully funded QBE for the past several years. Some of you may recall, though, that former Governor Nathan Deal released the recommendations around the potential modernization of that QBE funding formula. Honestly, I don't know that our current governor will take that up these last 2 years of his term in office. But this is an important mile marker as a policy issue, and there is a potential for us to start laying the groundwork on this concept, even as other legislators, other state senators and state representatives consider running for governor themselves. So some of this conversation in terms of your priorities are not just these next 40 days of a legislative session, but really teeing up conversations medium and long term about where we need to go as a state around education funding. We're going to ask that they establish dedicated funding of K-12 literacy supports. We're so excited and appreciative of the state laying down the priority it did around literacy instruction. But of course, we need supports to back that up. Instruction, coaching, professional learning, and middle and high school literacy remediation. We continue to ask for the establishment of state funding for universal pre-K for our very youngest learners, as well as an issue that came up last year, increased funding to school districts to cover those higher health insurance costs for certain non-certified school district employees. There's been a lot of talk around school safety over the past couple of years, and even very recently since the Appalachia High School shooting. We were appreciative that the House Speaker, John Burns, made clear that he wants to take up some action around school safety. And so many school districts are going to make as a priority a permanent budget line item for school safety, so that these grants are not just a one-off item, but a permanent source of funding for facilities upgrades, safety personnel, student mental health supports, and appropriate cybersecurity investments and upgrades. We would like for the state to continue supporting districts around teacher recruitment and retention, modernize funding formulas for school transportation, which are not immediately relevant to us here in the city of Atlanta, but it's important to a lot of our neighboring districts, and funding to lower the ratio of school counselors to students. So those are some of the funding buckets that we will expect to come up this next session. You may recall that the state of Georgia currently has about a $16 billion budget surplus. That's a significant amount of resources. And as we're at the last 2 years of the current governor's term in office, we may start to see some action from Governor Kemp in terms of how those resources are expended. We want to make sure that we are well positioned as a district to have the interest of APS and of public school districts in mind. as the state looks to make use and direct some of those substantial resources. Other than funding, there are so many policy issues that come up from year to year at the state capitol. We introduced the bill last session that did not go far, but we have put together a coalition between ourselves, the city of Atlanta, the parks community, and this is supporting legislation that would simplify the ability for APS and the city of Atlanta to exchange property, particular park property, between the two agencies. This is an issue that is a little more complicated than it should be, but put quite simply, there's parkland that the city owns that they would like to be able to make available to the school district, and we're asking for a bill that would simplify this legal process. We are going to work with community members in coalition around encouraging legislation around safe gun storage for families and communities. There is a pretty sizable stakeholder community that's already working on this issue, and this one facet of gun storage, of gun safety, is important. Of course, this one piece of legislation would not address all of the other facets of the issue of guns in our community, but it's an important start. And we want to continue advocating around protecting the role of local boards of education in selecting instructional and library materials. You all have been around for a while. You will remember some of the school library bills that have come up, the divisive concepts legislation. There's no way to know, to predict accurately how much of those types of culture war topics we'll see discussed this upcoming year. But we want to be able to speak up for and protect our students regardless of their gender identity, protect our district employees who know best the instructional materials and the library materials that should be in front of them, and just given the political nature that we see nationally and locally, we want to be prepared for any discussions in those areas. Other policy priorities, as always, protecting our APS property tax base. There was so much work last session around homestead exemptions and offering relief for homeowners. That is important, but we have to make sure that it's a balanced conversation that reminds legislators that the vast majority of our school district resources come from that local property tax, and we need to be able to count on our homeowners and our neighbors to help fund the important work that we do. Advocating for the expansion of Medicaid, specifically to allow federal reimbursement to districts for health services that we provide to our students, and protecting the civil rights, as I said before, of our students and school district employees. We will have a full and active government affairs presence at the Capitol starting in January. A full-time presence from contract lobbyists as well as our team, me, here at the Capitol working on our behalf, participation in those weekly delegation meetings with the City of Atlanta, Fulton County, and DeKalb County, close coordination with other lobbyists and activists working in the public education space. We work very closely with other school districts in coalition with them, the Georgia School Boards Association, the School Superintendents Association. We try to do a good job of reminding people that we are right here. We are literally around the corner from the Capitol, and we can participate, but we can also add our voice in a very strategic and smart way, add our voice to the many issues that come up that impact our schools. And then continued collaboration with the Council of Great City Schools and its member school districts around federal education policy funding and legislation, particularly as we're watching what's coming out of Washington. I'm happy to take any question.
All right, we'll start at this end. Nope. Cynthia?
Actually, okay, I'm sorry, I have two, but one of them will be
Two's
short.
good, that's great.
The first one is, what are we beginning to hear from municipalities and other school districts about the property, the exemption, and the process for opting out of that? Whether has that been developed yet, and what are we hearing from other governmental entities?
School districts are exploring all of their options. They are working with their legal and finance teams to understand the ramifications of the homestead exemption. and to make sure they are equipped to make a recommendation to their boards in a timely manner, as well as fulfill all of the legal obligations and statutory obligations that come with a potential opt-out. It will cost money to districts. And so they're looking to be responsible stewards of the resources made available to them, but also be strategic and intentional about taking advantage of and learning of the different options available.
And the other question is, how can we help and support this work?
As here in the legislative session, well, thank you for that. You know, we are fortunate to sit right here. You know, the Capitol is really a 5-minute walk away. So as we get closer to January, you know, of course, every year you all identify 1 or 2 legislative liaisons who make yourselves available to come up to the Capitol. You know, I'm honored to be able to have conversations with you and keep you all updated on a daily basis about what's happening there. But anytime you would like to come to a hearing, to participate at the rope line, to talk to legislators, these legislators, our Atlanta delegation, they're all our neighbors. They're people with whom you have relationships as well. So anytime you can add your voice to that conversation is very much appreciated. We will identify a contract lobbyist to handle some of this work for us on the state level. But as important as that is, it's extremely powerful when legislators hear from our parents, when they hear from our students, from our teachers, and from our board, because that makes it that much more personal to them. Our Student Advisory Council, I think this will be the 3rd year in a row where they come up around crossover day or sine die. So we're looking forward to that already, and they their voice is as impactful as you can get in terms of students who watch what's happening, who are concerned about where our state is going, and you know them, they're not shy about speaking out on what's important to them.
Well, speaking for myself, and I hope I won't get slapped down for speaking for my colleagues here, please let us know how we can help advance the mission of APS at the state level.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this. I also want to say thank you so much for prioritizing energy around getting free breakfast and lunch for students statewide. I do think that's an area where the state could lean in more. Only one thing that I wanted to add was perhaps to direct some of our ask, especially around the financial buckets, and getting the state to use more of the education surplus, because there is a significant education surplus set aside that really could answer for some of these conversations around school lunch and the like. So I just wanted to put that out there. But thank you so much for the effort. Also, I am the legislative liaison for the board this year, so more than happy to lean in and be of service. I was a former legislative aide, so no more ways around the hall. Would love to go with you.
Yes, thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you. Ken?
Thank you, Ms. Long. This is a lot of good stuff here. If we get all this done, we're going to be in much better shape. So good. We hope you have the wind at your back here. The piece, I just want to lift up that property tax piece. Ms. Briscoe-Brown talked about this. Is there a chance to have some? I know when Dr. Bracken comes to talk to us later, she's going to talk about opting out of the property tax bind that the state has put us in. Is there targeted tax relief that's possible, and how would we go about for our most vulnerable residents? How do we? Is that part of this process? Is there another process that we engage there? How do we think about that?
There are a few different things that can happen. Frequently on the state level, we see targeted tax relief to homeowners, and that's very important. You all hear from the homeowners through your budget hearing process. We live here in the city of Atlanta. We understand how expensive it is to run our city and our school district. Specific to our community, as well as some other communities, though, is the potential for relief to renters. And that is a separate topic that you don't usually see handled by the state legislature. It may be a place more appropriate for a city council or a county commission. I think about our families who rent their homes and how the property tax relief offered to their landlords does not necessarily show up for them. And I would love to hear from you all and to hear from other districts and other communities what can be done to help provide some relief and potential stability for families who don't have a mortgage on the place where they live, but who have a residential lease. But so far, just knowing what we frequently see is the political dynamics in the state government. There's a lot of energy, as Dr. Johnson says, there's a lot of energy around that relief to homeowners, and that's important. But we don't necessarily see as much of a talk about people who rent.
Well, I would welcome, especially if we're having this conversation around opting out of the cap, to have some sort of targeted relief, be it for renters, be it for owners, for our most vulnerable residents, our seniors, for all the class of folks that we know that are most impacted by the laddering up of property taxes. I would welcome an opportunity to if you brought that to the board, and I think there'd be some support for that. Yeah. And as others have said, if you need any help, this commercial property digest is a personal. I just don't understand why properties that are selling for millions of dollars are being taxed appraised at half as much in our commercial properties. That puts added burden on our residential payers because our commercial properties are not paying their fair share. And
That's
so,
right.
to me, I think that's beyond the state. I think some of that has to do with commission and other
Board
policies.
of Assessors, yes.
But count us in for whatever support you need.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Katie.
One quick follow-up to what we discussed this a lot during Budget Commission, and we asked for like a one-pager with all the property tax relief that is available for residents, legacy residents, seniors, fixed income. I think that would be very helpful for the board to understand everything that's available right now.
Yeah.
And then, of course, filling in what's being considered.
I think that's a great idea, and it would honestly be helpful at the Capitol as well. There is sometimes a misconception that school districts are just flush with cash and that we're not sensitive to the interests of homeowners. So if there's a way to put in, I will make a note that we can put in front of legislators, just one page. This is all that we're doing right here in this city to be more sensitive to and respectful of our homeowners.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. That's it.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Drake, we're ready for your presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, members of the board and Superintendent Johnson. I'm here today to present our annual facilities capacity and utilization review. As we mentioned at the October work session where we provided a sneak preview of the report, we are releasing the report earlier this year in December instead of February. We have completed our reviews with the principals for their projected enrollment and capacities and formulated this year's annual facilities report, which is included as an information item on tonight's agenda as item 9.1. This year's stakeholder engagement will be extended with a focus on dual campuses this spring and will continue in the fall of 2025, where we will review the underutilized and overcapacity facilities over the next 5 years. Any redistricting or consolidation recommendations will go for first read in November of 25 and for board approval at the December board meeting 1 year from now. This table has been provided as the key measure in the past 2 annual reports, where the red and yellow schools at the top are overcapacity or approaching capacity schools with potential action or annual monitoring. The green and blue categories are where we would like our schools to be, around the sweet spot of 65 to 95%. The purple category in the bottom is for severely underutilized schools. We have committed to no reviews or proposals of the purple schools until this school year, the 24-25 school year. Before we review the annual report, just a quick summary of this year's enrollment as compared to last year. Overall, we have a 285 student increase, as you can see at the bottom right, from last year. we see three categories of change. The three green clusters of Jackson, Midtown, and North Atlanta with a combined 576 student increase. The two pink clusters of Thurl and Washington with a combined 282 student decrease, and the other clusters in gray are relatively flat compared to last year. The utilization triggers for this year's preliminary report show 3 red schools and 5 yellow schools that are approaching or over capacity. We will review these 8 schools in an upcoming slide. The good news is that 23 of the 73 schools are in desirable green and blue categories, while 42 of the 73 schools are severely underutilized in purple, including every school in the South Atlanta cluster, for example. Looking at those 42 purple underutilized schools by cluster and type of school, you can see that 61% of our elementary schools, or 28 out of 46, are severely underutilized, while 12 of the 22 middle and high schools are underutilized. We do have our work cut out for us with this number of schools that are underutilized to this extent. The left map shows the 3 red schools of Midtown High School, Jackson High School, and King Middle School, and the 5 yellow schools. On the right, you can see the geographic distribution of the 42 underutilized schools in all 9 clusters. Of the 3 red schools of Jackson, King, and Midtown, Jackson and King are the most concerning, with current utilizations for each right around 103% and 99% respectively, but forecast increases those schools to 110% and 108% respectively. Midtown High School is expected to peak this year and next year at 106% capacity, then decrease to 100% to 102% in the last 4 years. These 3 schools will be part of our engagement and planning during 2025. 4 out of the 5 yellow schools are elementary schools that have available elementary school capacity within each of their clusters. North Atlanta High School, the 5th yellow school, we are watching we see it staying right around 100% plus or minus over the next 5 years. A new analysis of this year is our school facility size metric, where we look at enrollment 2 years out in the fall of '26 for all schools and reviewing schools below the threshold during that year of 400 enrolled students in elementary schools, 600 students or less in middle school or K-8 facilities, or 800 students or less for high school or grades 6 through 12 facilities. 33 of the 73 facilities, including half of all elementary school facilities, are below the threshold. This new metric will be used with the purple underutilized schools list as decisions are made in 2025. The focus of this spring and fall of 2025 is driven by 2 factors. First, for the budget, the district is forecasting challenges over the next few fiscal years, and we will be reviewing opportunities for efficiencies of scale, particularly on elementary schools and dual campuses. For SPLOST 2027, if approved by the voters, would start sales tax collections in July 27. Working backwards, the vote would then take place in November 26, and the board would approve the project list in April to June of 26. And we would need consolidation or expansion decisions later next year, about a year from now. This could affect strategic decisions on which schools will need renovations and other improvements, including potential additions. As we said at the beginning of this presentation, we will use calendar year 2025 for stakeholder engagement and focus on overcapacity schools, low enrollment elementary schools, and dual campuses, among other schools. While we have no specific details on the coming engagement at this time, we are allowing more time for the stakeholder engagement process from January through October of 2025, with any needed board actions coming to first read in November and a final vote in December next year. Any rezoning or consolidation decisions for these board approvals will take in effect as early as fall of 2026. We'll now open up to any questions or comments.
Thank you for this presentation. And so what I would like for you to help me understand is what resources are we using to account for projected increases in population in certain areas? Like, for example, I know that there are a number of facilities that are being planned specifically in District 2. So in terms of around the Maddox Park, just a couple of big developments that are coming to place. So can you help me understand how we also take that into consideration in terms of our projections over the next 5 years? I know we have yield numbers, but can you just give me just a quick explanation of how we are accounting for any growth?
Absolutely. So I'm showing on this slide if you look at the second bullet on the very left side, that our enrollment projections use various data sources. We use historic enrollment, so we went over all that, the number of students that are migrating up from one grade to the next, the number of live births, and we get that live birth data from the Georgia Department of Public Health, and that helps us to understand what our upcoming kindergarten class is. Your kindergarten class is going to dictate over the next 13 years whether you're going to have a growing district, a flat, or a declining. And we look at each of those by each of the 45 elementary school attendance zones. So we actually get that data sliced out for us, and we know the number of live births in each of those 45 zones. And then we also look at what you were referring to was our residential building permits. So like around Maddox Park, we'd be looking a lot of our sources that we get from the city, Atlanta Housing Authority, and all of that for any future new housing growth.
Okay, and then you apply whatever that yield number that you guys have to those developments to guesstimate
That's
how many
correct.
students might come to that.
That's correct. So we will take, depending on the housing type, whether it's an apartment, a single family, or somewhere in the middle, we will apply our yield rates that we have calculated per each of our 9 clusters. We apply it to those developments that are in those clusters by each of the years that we see the number of units that will be coming online. And that's the number of students we'll see online for that calendar year, fiscal year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. As always, I appreciate the detail here. I think to Board Member Baldwin's comment, if maybe in the appendix you can include show some work of how you drew, because I know people are going to be certainly in District 3 will look at some of these that you're forecasting to come back down and are going to ask a lot of questions. So I think the more that we can put out how we arrived at these calculations, why we think, for example, Midtown is going to come back down or whatever, or some of these different assumptions, I think the more that you could put that out and maybe just add to the appendix of this presentation, I think that would be helpful. I also like the idea that of consolidating this with SPLOST. I noticed in the SPLOST, for example, even today, we're going to be approving some funding for, a lot of funding for schools that are deeply, deeply under-enrolled. And so I wonder why, I wonder if that's the most prudent use of funds. I know we're kind of locked into some of these commitments, but the fact that these two globes seem to be spinning on their own axes puts us in a position where we're investing deeply in schools that we don't think are going to be long-term use. So do you have a reaction to that?
Totally agree. Totally
Okay.
agree. And that is the reason why one of the key reasons that we need to get this work done by December of next year, so that we make those decisions for the next BLOST, that we look at which schools that may need to be consolidated or additions and all that. Absolutely agree with it.
Excellent, excellent, love it. And then the last one is really probably more for Mr. Norvell as we think about this engagement process. You don't have to get up. I'm just pontificating. But if it's 8 months, that feels like a long time. And so the sooner, especially if we don't have details now, and we've got a lot of ground to move here, a lot of ground to cover. So the more that we can get that process out and can bring the community along. There's been folks don't need this to be repeated, that there's been so many false starts along this train. And so precision, urgency, aggressiveness, all good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zepp. We'll get it out as soon as possible, but kind of in short, We're not going to engage during the summer. So that's going to take a couple months off of that. We're not going to get a lot of great engagement. But what we want to do is have as many ideas to vet as possible. So then when we come back at the beginning of the school year, we can then get engagement around those specific ideas and options. And while some communities, you're right, have engaged and had a lot of false starts, the number of underutilized schools, we have not talked to those communities in years. And so we're going to take a lot of education and awareness for a lot of communities who haven't been a part of this conversation. And so we're going to focus on those communities first and then kind of fold in the rest.
Just and tying back to what my colleagues have said, our role as the board is around the work we'll be doing on our goals to back up, the changes that we will need to make across the system. So those meetings and working with the superintendent coming in January and tying it to strategic plan, and of course tying it back to East Blast. All those things aligning are so critically important. So just want to make that plug for us as the board and the work we have to do, and focusing in on our needs for our students, which this will all tie directly into.
I think you summarized that bottom bullet point on the screen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much. I know this is a sensitive issue, particularly representing two of these clusters, but again, I definitely want to continue to emphasize and place importance that there are families and children that are in these schools. And so while we are talking about the consolidation of the facility, potential consolidation of these facilities, I do want to uplift making sure that we talk about the trends that are in place as well. If you look at the social pieces of some of these clusters, particularly South Atlanta, where you have an aging population, you have less children and families that are in that area, but also that are experiencing huge displacement because of the affordability of this city. I do think that there is conversations, and we have to lean into that as we're talking about potentially the impact on some of these communities. The second piece I do want to put out in terms of engagement, I know that it was stated that there may not be an engagement over the summer, but definitely thinking about if there is any opportunities in that regards, whether it's the earlier part of the summer versus towards the end, because we do have families that adjust their own schedules, because of summer months for their children, and may have a little bit more availability as well. So I definitely want to uplift those two pieces, but definitely want to think about the social and the cultural trends and context in this conversation, so we're not just thinking about numbers within four walls.
No, that was very humanizing. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is a conversation that I want to say I'm looking forward to us leaning into, because I see so much opportunity. But also I hear Board Member Collins just about the need to humanize this conversation as well. But I think this is where we have a responsibility as a board to do, to do our part to make sure that we're engaging with the community to really make it be understood what we can get by making some of these tough decisions, as opposed to running away from, just in fear. Too often, we've done nothing. We talk about what we might do. We talk about all these different proposals, and then nothing happens. And that only falls to the detriment of our students and our district. I guess my only question was, are we not able to halt some of these investments that we're considering in buildings that we may be having to make some bigger decisions about? Because I heard, get me smarter, but are we locked into certain things and there's no going back? We have to spend the money type of thing? Is it that if we consolidated a school, we'd still have to use it for something else, so you might as well renovate it anyway? Like, if we're about to spend big amounts of money on schools that we might consolidate, are we able to go a different direction now?
We'll get Larry. Come on up, Larry. So I think some of these decisions are way down the road. And I got a whole lot I'm thinking about, but go ahead, Larry.
Excuse me. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. Yes, we do have some flexibility in redirecting funds within the language of the referendum. But our referendum, we wrote in such a way that we do have some flexibility. Now, depending on when, we may be through design for some of these. So there may be, in some cases, some sunk costs already associated with some projects. But certainly, we have the ability to, pump the brakes if needed.
Based upon today's consent agenda, do we have potential renovations for schools on our consent agenda that fall into that purple area, right? That perhaps, and I guess I'm just kind of directing this towards my colleagues, that perhaps we should be considering tabling for today. If not, not necessarily voting no on it, but maybe tabling it or taking it off the consent agenda for another time. Because I think as we're really having this conversation, this bigger conversation, we should be thinking about, are we putting money in places that are going to do us no good? And we're talking big amounts. I mean, they're 30 million, 20 million, 15 million. They're not small numbers. And we can be talking about ways to be building bigger, better for more. I just put that out there for us because I don't want us to just kind of feel like we got to be held to something because it's on consent agenda. Let's be a little bit more nimble and intentional if we can be.
Yes, all the projects that are on the consent agenda tonight are closeouts. So this work has already been completed.
Not new projects.
Digress, thank you.
Well, I will say the thought process though is right? Like in general, the thought process is right about the conversation being, and I think everybody needs to hear this, that just because you're next on the list doesn't mean you're going to be next on the list, because we're making a more comprehensive decision as to what the
That's right.
best usage of the dollars will be.
Thank you.
Yeah, just kind of the historical perspective of that as well, and just reminding the community. I know Board Member Brooks, you talked about in terms of we've been here before and we've done nothing, but let's remind the community every time we've came to this point, it was always there was always a huge heated division amongst what we weren't not investing in to make schools better in certain parts of the city to make them more attractive to communities. So I don't want the community to leave here thinking that we have not moved in these spaces we have. The second part of this, in terms as you grow into, like in the SPLOSH, there has been, Cynthia, there were two SPLOSHs where we had, that these decisions were made, money was allocated to schools that were under the quote unquote, under the conversations of potentially consolidations or closures. Those project lists were modified, those dollars were moved to support other projects in other schools until we actually got a handle on what the consolidations we were going to be. So I share that with you to say that there's always some flexibility. There's been flexibility in that space, but we have to be very open and honest and be ready for the conversation that happens every single time, because I know I've experienced it twice and been in a space where we've had to consolidate a school, build a great school, which is Tuskegee Airmen Global Academy, but the community is still dealing with the question mark of Venetian Hills as a facility. So I would employ that as we talk about these consolidations and potential closures, having also forwarding plan of what is our true plan moving forward for some of those vacant buildings as well, beyond what we just historically either earmarked them as swing sites or we would consider doing these, but really truly having a solid, actionable community-based plan. So I'll put that there.
Yeah, I would echo everything Ishay has said. We've, on a couple of occasions, we have made some promises to the community about buildings that we were vacating via consolidation that quite frankly haven't happened. And so when we start having these conversations, I think we need to be careful about having a plan and then following through on that plan. The other thing that I would say is that while the three GMP amendments on the agenda for tonight are in fact closeouts and are really fairly small amounts of money in the grand scheme of things. Also, we've promised to pay those, so we need to do that. But going forward and beginning in January, I would hope that we would not see requests on the agenda, recommendations on the agenda that will tie us into expenditures that we might regret 6 months or a year or 18 months from now. I think this is the time to begin thinking about the board agenda in those terms.
Okay, let's, oh, go ahead, Dr. Johnson, I was gonna say something.
Thank you all for your presentation. You'll have plenty of times to present over the next 12 months. On a serious note, we are anticipating multiple times for facility updates to come forward because it will be a topic of conversation. Dr. Bracken, we're ready for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to the board chair, members of the board, and Dr. Johnson. Today I'll be presenting 3 topics related to finance, and then I'll hand it over to Olfemi Aina, the Chief Information Officer, to provide an update on our student devices. First, I'll provide you with the financials for FY 2025 for all activities occurring in the months of July through October. Next, I'll present you a series of budget adjustments for the current year, and finally, I'll provide a brief overview of the progress of the FY 2026 budget development process, which will include a conversation about our final budget parameters. We will talk about the homestead exemption and discuss the school allotments. With the next 4 slides, we'll cover the FY 25 Consolidated General Fund financials for the first 4 months of the fiscal year. So far, we've collected about 21.29% of the total resources budgeted, and we're currently tracking ahead of pace as compared to this time last year for local revenue collections. Overall, our revenue collections is on pace with the last year at this time. On slide 5, we see the budget to actual expenditures so far for the Consolidated General Fund for FY 2025. Spending in all functions is appropriate for this point in the fiscal year. However, slide 6 represents the current spending trend for FY 25 against 24. Many functions are ahead of pace as compared to this time last year. For instruction, this is due to the purchase of electronic textbooks, dues and fees, expendable computer equipment, software, and the overall average salaries and benefits. Some of that is just the timing of purchases year over year. Staff services is due to the timing of software purchases and the rental of computer equipment. School administration is due to average salaries, transportation because of fuel payments, benefits, and overtime, and maintenance because of a large payment for water bills, salaries, and overtime. We're recommending no changes at this time, but we'll continue to monitor spend and leverage opportunities through the budget transfer process to address any unforeseen needs within the current allocations. As mentioned last month, we'll begin bringing a monthly review of spend for some of our federal program grants that mirrors our standard presentation for general fund. This slide shows our budget to actuals for Title I, Title II, and Title IV. Because federal grants operate on a fiscal year that begins in October 1st, it makes sense that we see actual collections at much lower than our general fund fiscal year. This slide provides more insight by comparing the pace of spend for the current year against last year. And here you can see that we are on track and spend is very similar to the previous year. We'll continue to bring forward this fund balance slide for review. With no major changes to revenue or expenditures so far this year, we're still on pace to maintain a fund balance that is equal to approximately 14.22% of expenditures. I'm bringing two budget adjustments. Both of these are for the special revenue fund. The first is an increase of $1 million for the Metro RESA grant. This is a pass-through grant from the state to support the new therapeutic exceptional education program. And we're also recognizing $1.4 million in capital improvement for the sale of property. Additional details for these adjustments can be found in Agenda Item 6.1. Agenda Item 9.4 includes the detailed financial information report for special revenue, any adjustments less than $1 million that have occurred in November. My final section will provide an update on the FY26 budget planning and development process so far. Budget parameters provide guidance on resource planning and focus on prioritized spending. For FY26, our resource parameters commit to maximizing existing revenue streams and continuing to seek philanthropic support from partners. We'll plan to budget that maintains a fund balance of no less than 12.5% of the planned expenditures, and we'll be able to demonstrate through a multi-year a means by which we could regrow fund balance to 15% in the out years. The expenditure parameters have not changed since our discussion at the November Budget Commission meeting, and here we're aligning the parameters with the current strategic plan. Based on the request from the Budget Commission meeting, we included a slide here that shows our proposed ending fund balance for FY25 as compared to some neighboring districts. You can see the range is from 8.69% to 23%. And as a reminder, our beginning fund balance for this year is 21.61%, so on the higher side of that range. My final section will cover the state homestead exemption passed by referendum last month. House Bill 581 contains within it quite a few changes, but the primary point of focus for our discussion today is the component that caps homesteaded property values at no more than an annually determined inflationary rate. APS does have a decision to make about whether or not we will opt in or out of this bill. If we opt out of the cap, we will need to follow a process that is very similar to the annual millage adoption process, which includes mandatory advertisements and public hearings, but will also include the adoption of a resolution, which must be provided to the Georgia Secretary of State by March 1st. This process cannot begin until after January 1st. And to your question, Board Member Briscoe Brown, we are having a meeting with the Fulton County Tax Commissioner's Office next Wednesday. We will be providing much more details about everything that we need to do to make sure that we are opting out appropriately. There are pros and cons to opting into the cap. Pros include the ability to offer more targeted relief to homeowners that can be achieved through the millage rate. It offers predictability and expedited annual millage rate adoption process. Cons include the opt-in out process is one time only, so whatever we decide now, we are locked into going forward. It can severely limit our access to local revenue and constrains local government control. We will continue to discuss the impacts of this legislation and make a final recommendation at this month's Budget Commission meeting. If we elect to opt out, we will then have a very quick turnaround to implement the process through the months of January and February. Also at the December Budget Commission meeting, we will discuss final recommendations for the FY26 school allotments. We have currently received the input data to begin running the formula simulations, and we'll be working on building the school budgets over the next couple of weeks. As a reminder, the primary change between the FY25 and 26 school budgets will be the inclusion of a base funded allotment for each school, which principals and GO teams will then have the flexibility to change with the appropriate data supports. We will likely be required to adjust some of the weights in the student success funding formula to ensure that schools are able to afford that base funded allotment. More details will be provided at the December Budget Commission meeting and at the January board meeting. And with that, I will hand off to Femi, unless you want to do questions for my part now and then questions for Femi's part. I'm going to keep going.
Any questions regarding budget? We can move forward.
Good afternoon. Board Chair Mitchell, Board Vice Chair McDonald, board members, superintendent, and community members. My name is Femi Aina. I'm the Interim Chief Information Officer, and today we'll be providing you an update on our student device strategy for the next 5 years, covering 2025 through 2030. To provide some context, let's take a quick look at our journey over the last decade, from 2014 through 2024. I'm sorry, this is the...
Senator, can we refresh this
Yeah.
deck? I don't think this is the correct deck.
Thank you.
Femi, keep rolling as she gets that updated.
Oh, you have the... Okay. So to provide some context, let's take a quick look at our journey over the last decade. From 2014 through 2016, early mobile technology began in many of our classrooms. Around this time, we also saw the transition from traditional software pricing to subscription-based models. From 2017 through 2018, the launch of our Digital Bridge program enabled us to distribute iPads to first and second graders, as well as Chromebooks to two high school grade levels. During this period, Georgia milestone exams also transitioned to an online format. From 2018 through 2020, a significant instructional shift towards online and digital platforms began to take shape. And in 2020, the Atlanta Board of Education approved a comprehensive plan to ensure every student had technology access, making us a one-to-one district. Thank you. Making us a one-to-one district. During the pandemic, this technology initiative helped bridge the digital divide and kept students connected. Still the wrong one. Since 2023, we have continued investments in digital tools, mobile devices, and personalized learning platforms. And we want to stress, it is important that integrating technology into our classrooms does not replace teachers. We see technology as a powerful support tool for both teachers and students, enabling instructional success while enhancing the learning experience. For many of the following reasons, technology is fundamental to our students' success. Platforms like My Backpack, Google Classroom, and Zoom are essential for student learning, and they require the devices we provide. Our technology initiatives help close the gap for students in underserved communities who may not have devices at home. Technology is essential for students in our full-time and part-time AVA programs, Hank Aaron Academy, and Phoenix Academy, who rely on hybrid or remote learning options. Much of the content and research material students need is only accessible online. Technology empowers students to take ownership of their education. They can learn at their own pace, explore passions, and develop the skills needed to succeed. Technology is not just a tool, it's a catalyst for more engaging, effective, and equitable learning experiences. And finally, state-mandated tests such as the milestones and benchmark assessments are conducted online, requiring the devices we supply. On the consent agenda for this month is an agenda item that supports our 5-year plan. We're requesting approval to implement a new 5-year device strategy for students across all grade levels from pre-K through 12. The total cost of the plan is approximately $33 million, covering the purchase of devices, accessories, software, services, and support, and includes the essential items like headphones, bags, the screen protectors, and more. The annual cost is approximately $165 per student per year. Google Workspace Plus will be included, giving students access to enhanced features on Google Classroom and other tools. The newly purchased devices will remain in schools, with older devices available for students to take home as needed. At the end of the 5-year lease period, this district will own the devices outright for $1 per device. Deployment of these new devices will begin at the beginning of the 2025-26 school year. And finally, during the FY26 budget planning process, we intend to request some funding to provide our students needing connectivity with hotspots and broadband options.
I know we didn't have, you're going to probably roll for question. I know we didn't have, could we go back to the timeline slide? I just want you to hit a couple of things I think that are really important. One, just high level, and I'll run through them real quick. But there's been investment over a series of years. And in effect, this is considered a refresh of the technology. If you go to the next slide, I think it's important to note that in reality, that nothing we do from a technology standpoint replaces the impact of a great teacher in front of every single student. And so we heard that in community meetings from the northern part of Atlanta to the south of Atlanta. The last community meeting that we were in was in South Atlanta, and a grandparent told me really clearly that we need to be mindful of how we leverage technology. So know that the technology is a resource. It's not the start all end all for any thing that's done in regards to the classroom. And then I think it's also important to note the next slide, if you will. It's also important to note the investment. And so I know a lot of times we talk in big numbers about what we're spending. In reality, it's about $167 per year is what the investment is. And I think right at when you take an instructional day and you look at the fact that we're in school 180 instructional days, it equates to about 92 or 93 cents an instructional day that we invest in technology. So a lot of times taking the big number and really breaking it down such that it's something that makes sense in a more tangible way, helps people really get their arms around what the quote unquote investment is in regards to technology. Thanks, Amy, for letting me interject. Keep rolling.
Yes, sir. So we're closely monitoring the potential impact of any tariffs under the incoming administration, as we expect that a lot of the things, technology and all of that, tends to come from Asia or China in particular. But we plan to utilize SPLOS for the SPLOS funding for our FY25 and FY26 annual lease payment. If approved by the voters, we intend to continue this approach into the SPLOS 2027 referendum. And again, the funding plan will cover Chromebooks and iPad devices, accessories, headphones, bags, screen protectors, and charging cards. It's also important to mention that the plan does cover 5 years of insurance, accidental damage, all of the Google licenses and software we could possibly need with these devices, including 5 years of maintenance and all the services associated with this, and asset management and tracking. And I do, finally, the plan is made possible by partnerships with Apple, Lenovo, Google, Incident IQ, Bradford, Proces Lexicon, and Huntington Public Capital Corporation, and we're grateful for their ongoing support. And with that, I will take questions.
Board Member Briscoe Brown, followed by Board Member Brooks, then Board Member Dr. Zeff, and Board Member Howard.
Thank you for this. Just a couple of questions. First, what other sources of funds do we have to pay for technology? Do we still get money from Hope? I know at one time the Hope Scholarship, the lottery money, not Hope, the lottery money, paid for technology. Do we still get money from that? Are there other sources of funding beyond SPLOST and beyond our general fund that we can tap here?
Not for this, but in the past, we've, whenever available, we've tapped a little bit into general funds. And of course, in prior years, we had access to CARES. So there was a lot of the CARES or ESSER funds available, which we were able to tap into. But we have planned this into the SPLOST referendum, and that's why we're focusing primarily on SPLOST.
And I note that these devices are for in-school use only, which brings me to the question of how we can ensure that our students have access to not only devices but also Wi-Fi outside of school. Because if they're using them in school, they may need them outside of school. And many of our students live in homes and neighborhoods where they don't have access to that.
Yes.
So I know the shift to in-school use only has a lot to do with damage. It has a lot to do with the devices disappearing, which we had a lot of trouble with during COVID. But I'm concerned that we are creating inequities by not addressing those issues outside of class as well.
So we have tens of thousands of devices today that are under warranty, supported, and still in use. When we roll out these new sets of devices, initially, those older sets of devices will be available for our students to take home as needed. Also, specifically during COVID, we received funding from the government to purchase almost 14,000 Apple devices specifically, so MacBooks, iPads, which part of the stipulation requires that those devices be allowed to go home. So all of that will support that initial need for students to take the devices home. As far as connectivity, we ran out of the funding to provide the hotspots. We worked with Comcast to provide low-cost broadband solutions at home where available. But even in communities where we provided hotspots, if they don't have a good enough or strong enough cell tower signal in the proximity of that neighborhood, the hotspot was really no good. But we intend to plan a little something into the FY26 budget to accommodate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I had some questions along the same lines as Board Member Brown. Initially when we talked about APS moving towards one-to-one, and we saw this, across the country, really the requirement for districts to move one-to-one. The idea was to abridge the digital divide. But if we're not allowing students and we're not normalizing students to take devices home, are we actually accomplishing that?
We're allowing students to take devices home. They're not taking these sets of devices home. That's initial recommendation.
Fair enough.
Right.
And so, look, I'm very familiar sitting down with my high schooler attempting to use a Chromebook to do assignments. And to be honest with you, they're frustratingly slow, they're clunky, they're not good. And it causes a lot of frustration. It gets to a point that a lot of times families will still use a personal device anyway. Is there a way that we could be more targeted? And I'm just curious about this. Is it possible to be more targeted about this? Like, we realize there is a digital divide, but many students do have devices at home. Are we, in fact, investing or spending money in places that maybe it's not even necessary?
I think it's a great question. Trying to figure out which answer I want to give. So there's a couple answers here. One, we're talking about $6.85 million or 6.75, right? So it's about a half a percentage point of what our annual budget is operating. So I want to just say that first. Second, I think as we look at textbook companies and providers, what we see is that they've moved more and more to frankly a web-based, web-supported type of resource, because for them it is the most efficient and effective way to keep up with the shifting state standards, et cetera. They don't have to come off of the additional continuous print costs. And they can frame it as, I'm not making any textbook friends right now, but they can frame it as, we're staying nimble, but in reality, it's saving us some costs. So we know that's a reality. I think the conversation around technology is a warranted one. I think there's a broader undertone around what we're doing instructionally and how we're leveraging technology instructionally. And that's a piece of the conversation that I know we're absolutely zeroed in on and leaning into. But as to whether or not we see the need for devices as the cost of doing business as a school system, I think that's a separate conversation. When you ask about being targeted, I think there are always going to be students that there will always be students and communities, frankly, where there's more device access than there is in others. I was at Phoenix Academy. I probably shouldn't say the name of school, but I was a school district. I've already said it now. A week ago, and I was standing with a student that I'm not gonna go too deep into the students because I don't want them to be identified. But the student's situation is such that he doesn't have a device, or we're leveraging. We're the device access, but doesn't have internet access at home. And so the hotspot we had given because of siblings had exhausted the usage. The next day, our team's able to get them a device out there. But I worry a little bit more about connectivity than I even do the device, and I think that's a broader conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think we got to have both and. But again, I want to be clear: the device doesn't replace the teacher. So I've got a lot of energy around how we leverage devices. So yes, we can be targeted, but targeted to what? I think there's one other thing I would say to your question, because it's a question that I've talked to Femi quite a bit about, is how we look at replacement of the devices that are lost, et cetera. And so there's a real conversation to be had. One of the challenges with sending them home is our insurance provider to date has stayed hard and fast on the police report has to come from the jurisdiction where it actually happened. So we're pushing and pulling and seeing what options we have with that, because we know that's a limiting factor in regards to schools' desire to send those devices home. So short and long answer is a part of this is the cost of doing business, in my opinion, right? It's the cost of doing business. Can we do it even in a more efficient and effective way? We should absolutely. Should we be making sure that our students have access to technology at home? If they don't, absolutely. The bigger question is broadband access, in my opinion, when we talk about where the gap is.
Yeah, no, I want to lean in on that because that was actually my next point. I do see an opportunity for our board to have some conversation with the city about a municipally owned and operated broadband service. Many places like Minneapolis, other places, they have it. It costs $10, a month, or free to students, right? I think that's something that, as a district, big picture wise, SPLOST money, eSPLOST, we should be looking at making investments in those type of ways. How could we join with the city to create broadband service across the entire city so that the connectivity, because I agree with you, the connectivity part, we could bridge that gap. Thank you.
And Board Member Brooks, I'll just give you a little bit of context around the connectivity situation, especially during the pandemic. The board worked closely with Comcast and AT&T to offer free connectivity for families who couldn't afford. And then also the ones who could afford it, it was like $10 a month. So it made it affordable. Also, I will say that the city of Atlanta have done a big lift to ensure that broadband are installed in certain areas that had low connectivity. So that work is still going on. And I don't know if you drive by certain areas, you see those orange little pipes still sticking up. That's the broadband that they're still installing. So I just want to kind of give you a little bit of historical context of what we were doing when the pandemic hit to make sure that we were doing one-to-one devices and they had connectivity. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was a work in progress and still opportunity to have those conversations.
Yeah. Lastly, that 5-year term, though, we've decided what we're going to do, but 5 years on those devices, it's a long time. That's a long time.
Yeah, I think my questions were asked around connectivity. That was what I was really interested in. So thanks for Dr. Johnson for diving into that. And then Ms. Femi, I know that you're presenting this presentation, but you're working closely with your academic partners,
Yes.
Mr. Usher and others, to make sure that this supports the academic work.
Yes.
All right, that's all I need to hear. Thank you.
We good down here? All right. Oh, go ahead.
Just real quickly, the leveraging of these devices and students not being penalized if they don't have a device for any reason. And then going back to the high quality instruction, thank you, Dr. Johnson, for lifting that up always. And going back to the budget presentation and how we're going to have to make shifts and decisions also while maintaining a 12.5% fund balance that we need to increase, knowing there's an uncertain political environment. And some other things that, we don't know exactly what's coming our way, and we have a $100 million gap right now. So all that combined, pay attention to Budget Commission. I will do a better job of summarizing because a lot of the conversation and questions we asked today were discussed during the Budget Commission. So thank you for this presentation. This is a decision we're making, and we know that we need to continue the work we've done in this space, but we absolutely need to make sure every student has access and support with high quality instruction, which is a very important investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move over to Board Goal Monitoring Report. During the 2022-2023 school year, Atlanta Public Schools began progress monitoring the 2021 to 2026 board goals using the Council of Great City Schools Student Outcomes Focused Governance Framework. During the first year of implementation, the focus of progress monitoring was solely on the board goals. The second year of implementation included progress monitoring both goals and guardrails. The guardrails, as defined by the Council of Great City Schools, reflect the vision of the community and should not undermine the school system's ability to meet the goals. The interim goals reflect the Atlanta Public Schools Administration's interpretation of each guardrail and first attempt to monitor progress towards upholding community values, priorities, and parameters in the areas of equity, stakeholder engagement, culture and climate, and innovation and accountability. This report specifically focuses on Guardrail 3, stakeholder culture and climate. It is now time for us to engage in board goal monitoring for Guardrail 3, interim Guardrail 3.1, the percentage of student, staff, and parents who indicate that the district has a welcoming environment free of fear, intimidation, and retaliation will increase from 80% in May of 2022 to 86% in May of 2024. I would like to take some time to review the norms and expectations for the monitoring session. As Dr. Johnson takes us through the monitoring report, he will discuss the district's progress toward meeting interim guardrail 3.1. Two notes as we move forward. The community will note that guardrail statements do not have targets. Under the student outcomes focused governance structure, only goals are drafted using the SMART framework. In addition, the superintendent has identified interim guardrail measures and targets that are aligned to the guardrail statements approved by the board. Board member comments and questions will be focused on items such as what are the factors that lead to current levels of achievement, what changes and adjustments need to be made, and what support do you need from the board to be successful. Please hold your questions until Dr. Johnson has had a chance to walk through the entire report. Board member comments and questions should not be evaluative, tell the superintendent what to do, suggest administrative actions, reference data that is not in the report. If we stray from the norms, our board chair will remind us of the norm expectations and ask you to rephrase your questions and comments to align with our norms and expectations. Dr. Johnson, please walk us through the monitoring report.
Thank you, Board Member Johnson. The first slide that you have before you is shows the increasing percentage of parents who asked favorably. And I should frame that we have obviously parents, students, and teachers, employees. But this one focuses on parents who answered favorably to "I feel welcome at my student's school" on the Georgia Parent Survey. I will note that about 1,876, or in fact 1,876 participants took advantage of the survey year before last, and last year there's an increase to 3,085. The orange target line shows us the actual level of progress towards this particular guardrail. We can see the percentage of parents who answered favorably to "I feel welcome at my student's school" on the Georgia Parent Survey increased from 90% in 23 to 91.3% in 24, which is about a 1.3 percentage point gain and is moving in a positive direction. When you look at the next slide, it shows us the percentage of students who answered favorably to "Teachers treat me with respect" on the Georgia Student Health Survey. In 23, there were 16,602 participants. Last year, there were 28,608 participants, so a significant increase in participation rates. We can see that 84.7% of students answered favorably to "Teachers treat me with respect" on the Georgia Student Health Survey. This is approximately a 2.7 percentage point decline since the 22 baseline year. Again, I would point to the number of participants and the level of increase that we saw as a byproduct of it being made mandatory last year. If we look at the next slide, it shows the increase in the percentage of staff who answer favorably to "I feel free to express my thoughts, feelings, and disagreements to my supervisor" on the Gallup Q12 Employee Engagement Survey. The orange target line shows us the actual level of progress towards this particular guardrail. We can see that approximately 68.7% of staff answered favorably to "I feel free to express my thoughts, feelings, and disagreements to my supervisor" on the Gallup Q12 Employee Engagement Survey. This is a 3.7 percentage point gain since the 22 baseline year. If we look at the next slide, it shows us our overall progress towards increasing the percentage of staff, students, and parents who indicate that the district has a welcoming environment free from fear, intimidation, and retaliation. The overall result is calculated using a weighted average. The purple line shows us our target. The orange line shows us the actual level of progress towards this particular guardrail. We can see that 81.6% of survey stakeholders indicated that the district has a welcoming environment free of fear, intimidation, and retaliation. This is a 1.6 percentage point gain compared to the 2022 baseline year. Despite the positive gain, we are still 4.4 percentage points below our target. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the administrative strategies in each of the areas. So, strategy one, we'll re-implement continuous customer service excellence training for all staff. One of the areas that Nicole, we've talked about is the need to continue to elevate this particular area. Next, we want to share family engagement survey results with cluster superintendents and principals and offer feedback and recommendations from families. It's important at a school and cluster level to have this data and to be able to leverage it to make decisions. Next, have principals share successes and opportunities along with recommendations, and ask school leaders to share results with staff and offer specific feedback. When we look at the next slide, when we look at students, we want to identify key professional development opportunities for teachers in partnership with teaching and learning. We want to make sure that we continue the open lines of communication, opportunities to engage in platforms and areas like student advisory. I know you as a board have breakfast with the board. All those opportunities provide us an opportunity to continue to engage with our students. Plan mindset and de-escalation training with the discipline department. We want to integrate the Student Bill of Rights to promote student advocacy and voice. We want to continue leveraging the Student Advisory Council as mentioned and breakfast with the board as mentioned, and provide a feedback tool for students to rate the quality of instruction. In fact, that particular item was one that came up during student advisory. Obviously, some of our students are in dual enrollment courses and have the Rate My Professor type of opportunity, and so they lifted the opportunity to give and garner feedback. In fact, I would go a step deeper. Several of our students spoke to being in situations in some of our schools where they're actually a part of hiring committees, which I think is a pretty progressive thought process, in particular with our upper grade, our high school and older students. Slide 9 shows us our administrative strategies as we look at staff. So we want to provide training to all supervisors, which was provided and will continue to be provided ongoing. But there was an HR summit on November 6th, which included topics that cover constructive feedback to drive performance with fidelity and care. We obviously want to encourage our employees to utilize the Office of Employee Relations and the anonymous tip line to report and resolve employee concerns. Each of our OER coordinators, as a note, is certified as a mediator through the Georgia Department of Justice. One of the next items we're looking to do is to establish a 360 feedback channel for leadership. We're actively sourcing the mode in which we will deliver that, but that will give us at a district level and school level an opportunity to get and garner feedback. We want to enhance employee well-being support with virtual therapy options and mindfulness offerings, which, in fact, I believe last school board meeting you all approved an expansion of those offerings. And then we want to follow up in feedback from engagement sessions. And so obviously we've had a myriad of sessions across the community. We'll continue to have those sessions. Some gave specific feedback for individual clusters and schools. Some gave more broad thematic areas for the district. And we want to make sure that we leverage that to continue to improve and to get better. The appendix on the following slides does contain cluster level data that you might find useful. And with that, that concludes Soft G presentation for today. Answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for this report, and thank you for pointing out the huge difference in the numbers of people who actually took the surveys, and interesting enough how it stayed consistent. Can you point to, I've got two questions because that's all I'm allowed. So why do you think we saw a decrease for students, but an increase for parents and staff? What is your understanding of, I guess, their experience as it relates to others? Because we do see a trend of, while the staff number is lower, it did trend up while little, but we're seeing a trend down for students. So I'm curious what your understanding is in that space.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wasn't here last year, so I get to pick on, not the right word, HR is involved. Let me clear, OER, volunteer. Anybody interested in giving their ideas or thoughts around why we see some student decline? You know, I think overall Joe's coming with some data. Tommy, come balance them. But 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 one of the things that I think is truthful is you do see ebbs and flows from year to year. I think our earlier conversation about how students connect. The technology conversation is real. The level and quality of the structures that are in the building that make the students feel like they're in an environment where they can engage and their voice is valued. I think is important. So I don't know, Joe. You may have some additional context from the data standpoint.
So last year was the first time since the pandemic that the Georgia Health Survey for students was actually required, and that threshold is a minimum of 75% to get what we call the Climate Star rating, which will be released later on in the year. But we had not seen that since 2019. So again, not utilizing that tool or having the experience of utilizing that tool since 2019 may have had a factor in, again, how you present the survey and promote the survey's importance. But to be quite honest, that is a very robust and lengthy survey for elementary, middle, and high school students. We're talking about almost 90 questions for high schoolers and middle schoolers, okay, and almost 30 for our elementary students. There are some revisions this year. The new survey is completely different, a little shorter, just a little. Down in the 70s. That's still too many, in my opinion. However, we will do as we are told. We will always follow the rules. However, the new survey is more aligned to the continuous improvement plans from the teaching and learning side of the Georgia Department of Education. So we'll be able to see a greater alignment, such as, how do I know if my work is good enough? Questions like that, a little more aligned to instruction than they've been in the past, while keeping some of those health and safety questions as well. But you could also make a very strong argument, and I've heard this from my colleagues throughout the metro area and other large districts, that the previous Georgia Student Health Survey, again, very large and sometimes very hard to really align to what happens within schools every day and to our own continuous improvement plan. So that misalignment was really one of the reasons why the Georgia Department of Education has moved forward towards revamping and creating a new survey. And perhaps that misalignment, it could attribute to those declines. But also, again, we've got to factor in that we had significantly more students participating for the first time in many years. And again, our rollout, we could probably learn a lot from that rollout and how to do better moving forward to make sure that students truly understand the nature, the purpose, the value in that survey, and to help our staff understand as well.
Yeah, and I would just add to Joe's point is I think also one thing you want to be careful about is to make sure, even in the framing of the deployment of that survey, that we get a true picture of where we are, because I've been on the other side of the aisle, and you know, if you have this survey that is indicative of maybe things that are going well or not so much, right? You sometimes can over-index on framing how it'll be leveraged, and so I think we need to be intentional about framing it as an opportunity for growth and improvement versus a punitive measure. But in so doing, also really open the door for our students and our parents and our employees to be really honest and transparent about where they are. So the decline doesn't, I want to be careful, even in our conversation, to make sure that we see the decline as an opportunity versus seeing the decline as, because what'll happen is, what can happen is that as folks begin to think about the deployment of the survey, I'm careful about saying this. I know where I am, but they start to frame it too heavily, and I just want to make sure we get pure results so that we can purely improve what we're doing. So, yeah.
Thank you for that lens. I truly believe that this is one of our most important guardrails, and that if we can move this one, that it impacts everything. And I definitely look at this as opportunity, like I look at any data that's presented in front of us. And I want to appreciate you for how you've elevated this presentation, and you've included some actionable strategies in here that shows that there's opportunity in these numbers, and I want to publicly thank you for that and your elevation of these presentations.
Oh, just to come back. That is a robust number of interview questions that I'm not sure everyone on this panel would enjoy getting all through. I know we would do a good job, but I think for asking a bunch of kids to do that, I think is a lot. So I'm wondering, could we, maybe not this year, but could we tap into our Student Advisory Council and have a conversation with them about, just to get student feedback on the ground? I mean, just to see if do we have any freedom to modify further the number of questions getting put in front of these kids? Or is it all just state regulated?
So again, so that is mandatory from the Georgia Department of Education. So we certainly, can look and find ways of how can we show greater clarity in the nature and the purpose, and how this can be valuable, and how we roll this out. We can improve there, certainly. We can also, hopefully with the new survey, it will better align with our continuous improvement efforts, and then leverage that. Because one of the difficulties with the previous survey, again, it's one snapshot, given really after the middle of the year. Typically the window opens in December and it closes at the end of March, right? So it's summative, but then there's almost a whole semester that has not been included. And then you're getting the data back in July when the year is gone. You really cannot address some of those issues at that point because those students have moved on to a different grade level, possibly a different school in many cases. We certainly can find, certainly there's value in the information, but however, in its current state, it's hard to leverage it to the maximum benefit of students when the data is coming after they've left.
Thank you.
Thank you for this, Dr. Johnson. I just picking up on Board Member Baldwin's comment around root cause analysis behind these numbers. It's such a high level. I mean, the fact that 1 out of 6 students doesn't feel like they have a place or feels disconnected from their teacher, that's concerning. But it could be because of a variety of reasons. It could be because of a discipline issue. It could be because of the curriculum's not culturally respectful, or it could be because the teacher's going too fast or too slow. I mean, there's 100 reasons, and so it does seem like it's hard to develop an action strategy. It could be all localized at a couple schools and not at other schools, and so I get nervous about saying district-wide we shall. And so I just encourage, and I know we have a lot of data here, but as you dig into this, the root cause analysis seems like it's the whole ballgame here.
And I think one of the things, even as we're going through this and this part of the continuous improvement, I don't know if we have this breakdown, but I am intrigued, elementary, middle, high, what the numbers look like, because what happens in the middle and the high, it begins to look, it will look different. And so I'm certain we're seeing some noise, as everybody that took this is, from the standpoint of middle and high as well.
Yeah, and I too am looking at slide 6 very closely, and I appreciate the strategies, again, you laid out, Dr. Johnson and team. And for student feedback, let's talk the QR code, anonymous feedback. Will that QR code, how will that be posted, put out in schools, like to really get, and I'm sorry, that was an answer to one of my questions that went to everybody, thank you, in advance, that not everyone's seen in the community. But yes, the response was that there will be a QR code for student experience because my high schoolers absolutely fill out the survey. And we're always talking about ways we get more authentic, meaningful feedback in different ways, but ways we can use that information and do something with it. So anything that can be shared around where that QR code will be available and how we build trust, even get students to provide feedback, especially high schoolers.
Interesting that you mentioned QR code, because this is the first year that that survey will have one. So previously, you had one link for every school in the state, and you just chose your school. And it was just open. This year, the links are specific to each school in the state, and there are also specific QR codes. There's two ways of doing it. We have a link that's specific to each school, and we also have QR codes that are specific. And so we will work with Office of Schools to provide guidance to our schools on rolling this survey out. But this is the first time that there have been unique links for each school in this required survey, and unique QR codes. We have an opportunity here to do more with this survey than in the past, and to roll it out in a different way.
Great. I look forward to seeing what we get from that survey option. And another thing that was highlighted underneath for students with a planned mindset and de-escalation training with the discipline department. And I appreciate that being called out. And I know some responses were given in the answers as well around the text-based mental health app and some other things. So just how we continue to talk about opportunities in this space to continue to support our students. And I don't know if anyone wants to provide any additional information on those tools that are going to be looked at, but just wanted to call that out and the strategies that I appreciate.
I won't speak on the second part, but I will speak to the QR code because of Let's Talk. So it is an addition that Erica Long and her team, Dr. Kyra Caldwell-Templeton, added for student feedback. So it's a special form within Let's Talk that if a student goes in and wants to provide feedback, where it asks you, what topic do you want to submit? What's on your mind? What are you thinking? What ideas do you have? And it's kind of pulling for a little more information than a standard Let's Talk kind of template. So we are looking at expanding that, and then we can help direct that student feedback to the correct kind of team. And it's anonymous, confidential, all of that's written in the form when students can go to that QR code.
Great, thank you.
Are there any more questions? Board Member Brooks?
Dr. Johnson, I believe I'm not sure if you asked for it, but you had said that we wanted to be able to see, I guess, a breakdown via cluster or per the schools, kind of what the responses were. Is that?
Yeah, I think at least by level, and we'll do cluster as well, because we've done cluster and some other things, and including I don't know if can we get the data at that granular level and business come from the state?
Yeah, we
by grade level, so we can do by grade level.
We can do some breakdowns.
Right. So I personally kind of struggle with these surveys as someone who has to fill them out on the teacher side. Just when I talk with my peers, and especially with the kids, like really at the high school, middle school level, there's like this level of cynicism and kind of I'm gonna stick it to you in a survey kind of thing. And I question, it's just true. Like I question how much like authentic information we're able to get from surveys like these. I mean, like I look at this and I struggle with like, man, like, okay, so you got this information, what do you do about it, right? Like it's hard to track growth in specific places. It's hard to kind of figure out what you do from it. And then it's also hard to judge whether or not the responses came from, the negative responses came from a kid who was upset that the teacher said something to him on that specific day. So I'm gonna zing you on a survey that day. The one area that I do kind of have I take exception to is the culture and climate for staff. I feel free to express my thoughts, feelings, and disagreements with my supervisor piece. In the education space, among the teacher community, there's a lot of conversation about the culture and climate in APS. And historically, it had been one of those things that would detract teachers from wanting to come to APS. So that feeling of, there's retribution all over the place. I can't say how I really feel. That's one of the areas that I just challenge us as a district to be very, very intentional about, because I think that's where we can get the shift in maintaining and sustaining the great educators that we have and getting more and keeping them. Thank you.
Hearing no more questions, so I would like to thank you all for your reports. Dr. Johnson, I don't know if you had anything to say. Okay, we can move this right along. With that being said, Madam General Counsel, is there a reason for the board to retreat into executive session?
Yes, Madam Chair, the board needs to discuss legal, personnel, and student matters.
Thank you. Is there a motion to enter into executive session to discuss student discipline, personnel, legal, or real estate matters?
So moved.
Moved by Board Member Briscoe Brown, second by Board Member Collins. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.